Welcome to paradise. My name's Kurt Robinson. I'll be your host. Going to show you around this magical realm, experience the enlightenment. Join me on a fantastic voyage. So today, a couple of months ago, I had an interesting conversation with two of my good buddies, Mr. J and my friend Link McElvenny. So we're discussing some topics related to having a code, having integrity, principles, ideals, rules that you live by, guiding ideas that you try to live up to. So we talk about a lot of things. Let me just check my list here because there's so much stuff. We talk about open-mindedness, the non-aggression principle, freedom, specifically the difference between rebellion and true freedom. The differences between the East and the West way of viewing things, especially when it comes to teaching and learning from the masters. And we talk about ways to change yourself and align yourself with your own principles. And masculine and feminine polarity, the difference between persuading people in a masculine or logical way and a feminine or emotional way. And, well, a whole lot more. So remember to jump on to steemit.com, steemit.com, and you can check us out there at paradise-paradox. So jump on there. It helps us out a lot if you follow and press upvote. Much appreciated. And we also very much appreciate all those donations that are coming in. You can head on over to donate.theparadiseparadox.com and you can give us a little tip, a token of appreciation, of a little support, a little mental message to send to us. Yes, what the Paradise Paradox does is important, interesting, entertaining. Hopefully it's one of those three. So suggested donation, suggested tip, $1 US per episode that you like. But give as much as you want or as little as you want. We appreciate it all because even if you send the smallest Satoshi, it still represents to us that what we're doing is important and you're taking a minute out of your day to do that. So lots of love. Let's get into it.
Right now, as you guys probably know, I'm living in a temple and ordained as a kind of Buddhist monk in this radical order of renunciants, I guess they call us. Sounds a bit weird. So I've been thinking a lot about my way of life and so much of having a path in the traditional sense is creating a conscious framework for the way that you live, creating a schedule and a structure that allows you to develop in the ways that you want to develop. So I was thinking about this and I was contrasting it, I guess, with the standard way of life of the culture in which I was raised. And so I thought it might be interesting to talk to the two of you, Mr. Kurt and Mr. Link, because you both have such, developed ways of life from my perspective. And so I was just curious as to how you both see your own lives through this lens of codes and frameworks and ways of life in general. I sent Kurt this little list of things we might talk about in a little quote, which is not from a particular film. It's a line from lots of films, and the quote is, "A man's got to have a code." And so when I was growing up, I loved the idea of chivalry and the code of a knight and I studied Western chivalry and the code of the samurai and various other codes of soldiers throughout history. And then in my pseudo-medical studies, oriental medical studies, looking at the codes of various positions through the ages. And then in my spiritual studies, looking at various different codes and frameworks of monks throughout history, and in my art, looking at different I don't know what you call them, theoretical frameworks for the creation of art. But art is an interesting one because I love reading the writings of artists, but can you really trust a writer who writes about the way that they write? How much of these codes are descriptive rather than prescriptive? You can go into any bookstore and buy a book on, say, screenwriting, for instance, and it will give you a framework with which to write a film. But if you write a film with that framework, it will be a shit film. There's a difference between creating something that functions and just referring to a set of guidelines or a code in which to create something. So it seems like, okay, cool, you can have a set of rules, you can have a code, you can have a way of life and just implement that in your life, and that should make your life better. But if you look at something where you have a clear result which has a quality that you can assess, it becomes quite a nebulous thing. What is it to run a code? Is it necessarily better to be running a code? I mean, I know a lot of friends, sorry, not to disparage a group in particular, but I know a whole bunch of people who are Christians, but their code of Christianity doesn't really seem to be helping them very much. It helps them avoid thinking about certain things, but it doesn't necessarily help them develop, for instance, virtues or refine themselves as human beings. So, what's the difference between a functional code, a living code, and a dead code, a code that becomes a way of justifying a lack of growth? So anyway, that's how I wanted to open up. But Kurt, you wanted to talk about principles. So maybe we can start with the idea of a principle being perhaps the smallest functional part of all three of these things that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. What is a principle?
Well, the thing is, when you guys told me that we're going to talk about codes, I thought, well, I don't really have a code exactly. Like
man's got to have a code.
Sorry?
Sorry, I just said a man's got to have a code.
Okay. So I guess I better find one. I'll buy one at a $2 store. But I do have certain principles and things that I value. But I feel like if you say a code, it sounds like it should be codified. It sounds like it should be maybe not written down, but it sounds like it should be very clear as what that is. But what you're saying there is kind of contrary to that, because you're saying just because it's written down doesn't mean it's actually the real thing. The real thing is more abstract in your thoughts and in your actions. It's in terms of principles. There's one which is one simple idea which is important to me, which is called the non-aggression principle, meaning that it's not reasonable to normally. It's not reasonable to initiate violence against peaceful people. So if someone hasn't done anything violent against another person, then you probably shouldn't punch them or kidnap them, put them in a cage, or put a gun to their head, anything like that. And the other idea which is related is a value, which I would say is a bit more abstract than a principle, because it's like a priority. So to have a value can help you decide your principles. So if you value, let's see. Yes, well, for me, I value my freedom very highly, and I value being able to do what I want to do. But as a counter, as the counterpoint to that, as they say, with freedom comes responsibility. So you might have the freedom to do a lot of stupid things, but that doesn't necessarily mean you should do them. So each individual has to govern himself to some extent.
I've been thinking a lot about non-violence and non-aggression recently, and it's interesting because I've been a kind of violent person in the past, mainly in terms of protecting other people, but I realized that I don't get angry really on my own behalf, for instance, but for some reason I'll get angry on behalf of abstract notions. So I'll get angry on behalf of reason, or I'll get angry on behalf of freedom. And when I get angry on behalf of reason, then I become very, very violent, but not physically. I become very verbally violent.
Right.
And not verbally violent in the way that somebody who's untrained is violent, but more along the lines of a kind of soft violence, whereby I'm very calm and rational, and but what I say is designed to change another person in a way that they don't at that time want to be changed. So it's interesting, this principle of non-violence, and when I want to justify it, I justify it in that it's kind of like surgery or emergency medicine, whereby you might have to cut into somebody's body, or you might have to cause some pain or do some damage on some level, but hopefully on a deeper, more important, more intrinsic level, it's actually doing them good.
Yes.
But I don't have consent for this process. I mean, there's an implied consent in the process of conversation and communication. But the person really doesn't want me to be doing to them what I'm doing to them when I speak in this way. So it's interesting. And I guess in that way, there's a framework that sits inside of my way of dealing with this code and with this value. Which again makes it very, very vague. The more you try and pin down these things, the less clear it becomes, and so often it becomes a kind of case-by-case scenario.
Well, that's interesting. So one thing which I've started to try to develop in myself, like I think I have that same habit of trying to force people using reason or change them against their will. But of course, it's most of the time it's not very effective. But that's kind of this very masculine thing, and there's also this feminine way of persuading people. So there's this old parable about the cow that's in the stable, and the people on the farm want to get the cow to come out of the stable so they can clean it, and the farm hands and the boss, the man of the farm, is like standing there trying to push the cow for hours and hours until the cook comes out, and she just She puts her big fat finger in the mouth of the cow and just leads it out. And that's this difference. Like it's a difference between a push and a pull, and a masculine and a feminine, and softly leading people rather than trying to jam people where you want them to go. And I think in a lot of cases it tends to be more effective.
Oh, for sure.
That analogy is really interesting as well, because, you know, there's this cow, and I mean, you know, while they're trying to push it in the direction they want it to go, it is acting like it doesn't want to go in that direction. But then, if led well, like, it just makes me think of whether or not that cow knows what it wants, or which direction it wants to go in, or what's best for it, or, you know, all these ideas. So, I mean, often it seems like I get the most frustrated when I'm trying to encourage somebody or help them see, you know, a way of looking at things that will help them, like help alleviate some of their suffering, or help them, you know, get what I think might be good things for them. And it's just that interesting thing of, like, sometimes they absolutely don't want to move in the direction that I'm suggesting they should go in. But in other times, it's just the way in which I suggest it. Like, they might want to go in that direction, but if I frame it in a certain way, it just seems too hard, or it seems contrary to what they believe, or, you know, whatever. There's some reason why they resist it massively. And then I could phrase it another way, that they would move in that direction and really easily. So, you know, it's that really funny thing of, figuring out separating my desires from actually helping them, and then also, like, trying to be objective about, I mean, anyways, this is a big can of worms, but I think it also opens up this idea of that people, if they do what they want to do a lot, then it often leads them astray, you know, like in terms of indulging in eating or indulging in various sort of things. But so yeah, just before you guys are talking about freedom and these kinds of ideas, it does make me think a lot about this idea that people I don't think really understand themselves very well, or are honest with themselves very well to be able to look at these things clearly.
So it made me think of two things. The first thing is this quote from the Dade Ching. Excuse my pronunciation. But yeah, it's talking about masculine and feminine. It says that the feminine always overcomes the masculine. And so you should know the masculine, but then stick to the feminine. And I think that's a beautiful way to look at communication and look at a way of dealing with other people. And the other thing was in terms of mutuality. So at training, for instance, everybody at training ostensibly is there to improve their technique. And so because we have this shared goal in mind, it's much easier to give people information that will help them change and help them grow, because the direction in which they want to grow is defined. But when that direction is not so clearly defined, then it becomes far more difficult and maybe even pointless to try and help someone develop in a way which they're not interested in developing. So I guess in terms of ways of life, it becomes important that the people that you're interacting with share at least an overlap in their way of life and your way of life. Otherwise, they're just going to translate whatever you say and whatever you do into something that's nonsensical. It reminds me of this a quote from famous Zen anthology. They say that if you meet a swordsman on the road, then show him your sword. But if you meet someone who's not a poet, don't show them your poem.
Reminds you of that Thus Spoke Zarathustra thing. I mean, I've already listened to the audiobook, but yeah, the gist I got was that idea of yeah, all these great ideas. You really like. There are people who actually want to hear them, and you should probably communicate with them rather than just smash your head against the Facebook wall, or just go into go talk to your family or other people who really don't want to hear your latest revelation.
Right.
Well, I think Nietzsche was very cynical about humanity, and probably rightly so, given the era in which he lived. There was really this massive divide between the herd and the Superman or whatever, the actualizing human being. But I like to think that these days there's less of a gap between the potentiality of the everyday person and the potentiality of a highly refined person. But that's probably just silly. That's probably just overemphasizing information. Because these days everybody, or so many people, have access to so much information. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll avail themselves of the practical application of that information, which I guess is the difference between a refined person and a person lacking refinement.
And that's actually makes it more difficult because people speak with this language that should suggest a refinement or suggest that they're exploring themselves and ideas, but really they're just wearing it like fashion, and or for some other reason. And It's it's frustrating when you want to explore real shit, but then you find out there's very much a limit. I mean, I know I have my own limits, but some people are very limited when they pretend not to be.
Right. So you're talking about like people who wear the trappings of spirituality, but they don't really want to get into spirituality, that sort of thing.
Well, for me, like, this might seem a bit, whatever. I'll just say it. Like when I first read and understood the concept of the Buddha and enlightenment and that state, and how like the noble truths that this world is suffering and all these sorts of things. From that point on, I saw most of my regular life, anything that wasn't sort of heading in that direction of awareness and spirituality, as a little bit silly. Like I already like if I understand this truth, then I can see that this ego stuff is quite a lot of the times bullshit. But I've realized that it seems like a lot of people don't have that reaction to reading or finding out about these truths. Like. It seems more like... No, I should speak from my own experience. I mean, when I first got into spirituality and stuff like that, I just ate it all up, and I really liked the stuff that made me feel better about myself and made me forgive myself and let myself off with a lot of shit. And so it took time for me to really step up the honesty with myself and the discipline and accepting that a lot of the ways I think are bullshit and selfish, and that a lot of that stuff is there, and accepting that. But I don't know, it just seems like people don't really want to understand the deepest truths of the things. They just want to kind of fantasize, I guess, and play, which again is cool, but like. Yeah, it's just surprising to me that that people don't want to go to the deeper place of it all, I guess.
That's the bell curve. That's the common demographic. Like I don't know. It's funny. I'm so naive in so many ways. Every time I explore a different facet of the world, I'm surprised that people don't hold to the principles of the framework in which they exist. If you meet a group of people who are generally hermits, you'd expect because they're hermits that they would behave in a certain way, and you would have this massive skew towards one end of the bell curve. But in fact, hermits sit along the same bell curve as every other group. And so, like science, modern science is the the religion of our day, the religion of the West right now, and so many people who consider themselves scientists, I guess, or scientific in their way of life. They're not scientific at all. And as soon as you want to discuss with them some of the strange paradoxes of science, like people, when they find out someone's a Christian or something, often they have a whole bunch of paradoxes or issues with belief and faith and that way of life, which they love to run these believers through the gauntlet and show them how undeveloped their thinking is with regard to their own path. But if you do that with a scientist, or a pseudo-scientist perhaps is a more accurate way of describing it, they react in much the same way, whereas
Yes.
the actual principle of their belief is to react differently than somebody of faith.
Yes. Well, I've had that many times when you say, "Well, come on, let's look at the evidence here," and it might be some claim which seems a little outlandish, like something like homeopathy, and I don't necessarily believe in homeopathy, but I say, "Well, let's look at the evidence," and they're like, "No, you're just a fanatic," and I'm like, "No, let's let's have a look here."
And but that's really interesting because I'm just as guilty as as most people in terms of the fact that I have ideas of principles and things that I want to live by, but I don't. My reactions to things still come from a very egotistical place. A lot of them are quite selfish, and so they don't. My actions and my reactions often don't line up with my principles, and I know that that's it's somewhat out of my control. Like I can't just flick a switch and change all my habitual reactions overnight. But yeah, the principles I see them as these things that I'm aiming at, and like a way of cross-referencing what I'm doing in my actions to see if I'm achieving that or getting close to it. But yeah, because when I think about principles and stuff, like I don't remember really having any principles when I was younger at all. Like I didn't like. I don't know if I think I liked samurai stuff or ninja stuff, but I didn't really like. I had a bias against refinement or ideas of being refined, because I sort of came from a lower income sort of drug-addled family, so what I kind of related to was more like creativity and weirdness, and not being, I guess, so much in the mainstream of culture. But then when I look at my values and what I wanted for my life and stuff, they still very much were to satisfy cultural things, even though like I considered myself countercultural in terms of from a very early age. I knew that most of the stuff that people were interested in I didn't like so much, and I thought a lot of it was bullshit, especially like TV stuff and film stuff. When I still looked at what my motivations were, they were still to become a successful actor so that I could be famous and have lots of money, and then people would love me, So like, and over time, I've explored more philosophical systems and developed more principles and these things like, not harming people, or I've gone through phases of thinking about becoming vegetarian, or just these other different choices, these ethical choices that I've made. But yeah, like it's changed over time, and like it seems to more and more be like there was I guess a period like 5 years ago where I was really countercultural and really much more into conspiracy theories and anything that basically said what people normally think is wrong. I loved that shit, and so I just went straight for it. And then over the last couple of years, I've been kind of, I guess, swaying the pendulum back a bit and sort of trying to figure out what parts of culture and the structure of things is useful or whatever. So yeah.
Press like on YouTube, press like on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, iTunes and Pocket Casts. Follow us on Twitter at BattleAZ, at Trouble Bubble, and show your support at donate.theparadiseparadox.com.
When I was young, I had this idea of rebellion, and I read a lot of philosophy when I was a kid, and I really liked the idea of like existentialism, and Camus' idea that in order to be free, you really have to be a rebel on some level, and so I took my rebellion very much to heart, and growing up in the 90s, there was this strong push, even inside of what became mainstream media culture, to not care what other people thought, and to develop yourself in your own arts, your own music, your own clothing, and be create this kind of autonomous freedom. But when I started studying Oriental medicine, we learnt about the flow of energy, and there's this idea of rebellious energy, energy that's not flowing correctly in the body. And my lecturer asked if the energy is normally going down and it's rebellious energy, which way will it be going? And he asked me, and my answer was, who knows? It could be going in any direction. That was my idea of rebellion. And he said, no, it's rebellious. So it just goes in the opposite direction. If the energy is normally going down, then if it's rebellious, it's going up. And often this is the way rebellion works. You see what direction something is going, and then you go in the opposite direction. But that's not freedom. That, if anything, it more closely defines the thing that you're rebelling against.
Yeah, it's like how they say Satanists are actually just Christians. Or I guess Luciferianists would be the more accurate term. Well, what you were saying, Link, about examining your actions and seeing if they're in line with what you want them to be. It made me think of this idea that I guess I read from Aleister Crowley, which it's like a magical principle that if you want to summon a certain spirit or invoke a certain spirit, you have to bring your life into alignment with that spirit. And I also apply this more generally, like if someone wants to learn German, then what they have to do is surround themselves with things that are German, surround themselves with the language, learn it and listen to it and read it, so they can not become German, but absorb the language. But Crowley mentions that this idea, like you can attempt to become so in alignment with an idea or a spirit that every thought begins and ends with that thing. So you're basically obsessed, and you never stop thinking about that thing. So you're trying to put your life completely in the place of this thing, or in alignment with this thing. But I don't know if something like that would be desirable if you're trying to develop a principle, or maybe it would be in the short term. Or similarly, Benjamin Franklin had this system where he would have 13 virtues that he would want to develop. And so every quarter of the year he spent 1 week trying to develop this virtue within himself, to become a more rounded person.
Yeah, well, with that, what you're saying before about creating a spirit or having a spirit that you have at the start and the end of everything. It seems like
Yes.
I know I've experienced that when I've been in love with somebody, and everything that I do, no matter how unrelated to them, I still am thinking about it in relation to them and how I will communicate with them. So I can understand that, and also, but I mean, in terms of developing principles and stuff, I imagine it would be quite useful in certain situations. Like that thing could just be, your teacher or the universe or love or some kind of inspirational, maybe you could say ideal or what do you call it? Idol, hopefully not false. That will always point you back in that direction. Like I know for me, whenever I'm doing things, if I just think of my teacher, hopefully beforehand, but even during, like say when I'm treating a client, I'll be giving them the treatment, and I might be thinking about other things or whatever, or getting a bit frustrated with the fact that I have to do this thing or them or whatever it is. And then if I can remember my teacher and sort of remember that that I can be excellent, or that I can approach this thing even though I'm tired or I don't want to do it or whatever, I can use that as another challenge to be even more excellent and to be more present and aware. So it seems pretty useful in that sense.
One of my teachers gave me this analogy. He said that development is like a bullet, and if you want the bullet to go far and to go straight, you need a long barrel. So you have this explosive force, but without a long barrel to guide the initial velocity of the bullet, it won't go straight and it won't go very far. The gases that push the bullet out need something to push it through to create velocity and trajectory. And so, I think this is one of the things that is missing in a lot of Western culture. We have great notions and great intentions, but we have nothing to guide that original creative explosive energy, because we're really skeptical and really dismissive of the idea of a teacher or a model or a guide or something. If you look at contemporary art, so much of it is about trying to find some what seems like originality, but in actual fact, it often becomes just a search for some kind of gimmick to attach your name and your artistic image to. Whereas if you look at the innovators of the past in art, they were always reacting against some previous model or some previous genius. They were taking impetus and motivation from classical sources, from recent examples of brilliance, and using them to create this trajectory and this momentum. It wasn't this total tearing away of the past. I remember I met a writer when I was studying literature, and he wanted to write a book that was nothing like any other book that had ever been written. And when he told me this, I was really rude back then, but I laughed. And I told him that it was A, a ridiculous aim, and B, even if he succeeded in creating this tome, it wouldn't have any functional value, because it wouldn't have a basis in shared experience of verbal reality. You could create a book like this out of a combination of random elements and destroyed syntax. But what would the point be? I mean, if you look at William Burroughs, he had this idea of cutting up, creating text and then cutting up and mashing parts of it together to create these kind of sparks. And Allen Ginsberg had a similar idea of putting words together which he couldn't find a rational association with. But someone reading it with the habit of creating rational associations with words would then have this kind of mental explosion, because they were naturally sandwiching together two things that wouldn't normally make a sandwich. But still, these things referred to images of that would function in a more classical version of literature or poetry. It wasn't a sort of total abandonment of previous models or previous functionality or previous qualities. If anything, the qualities of previous movements were held very sacredly by these so-called rebellious artists.
Yeah, well, and that's an interesting idea, like the desire to be original. You know, like it seems to be so important to a lot of artists. And what I find with a lot of really excellent artists, people who make, you know, great music over time, blah, 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 it seems like a lot of them, they might start out having that aim and trying to be experimental, trying to push boundaries, trying to fuck with people, that kind of thing. And then as their careers progress, they often seem to get a bit more traditional or pay a bit more respect to the genre or the form. And yeah, like, I mean, I was listening to an interview with the guy from Unknown Mortal Orchestra, and he suggested something along those lines. And if you listen to Multi-Love, you know, like that, if you're not listening very intently, like it sounds pretty poppy, and, you know, you could be fooled with thinking that there's not that much going on there. But if you actually listen to it, it's like, it's really good music, but it's not trying to sound new and unique. It's just, it's unique because he's an artist and he's making it. You know, I think you mentioned something about that at one point in terms of not trying to be original, Jeremy. But yeah, like why do we feel this need to be so original? Like, why is that important?
Yeah, that's definitely it. Yeah, I find that it seems like people of all disciplines commonly have this idea that having a teacher is wrong, and it's strange how common it is. How common it is. Even when I was playing cards a lot, when I was playing poker, I would meet people and they would say, "Oh, I never read books about poker. That's not the right way to learn poker," or something like that. And I would observe the actions and the mentality of these people, and I would see that they would make these mistakes that were so fundamental, and they really had no idea that they were making a mathematical mistake in a certain situation. Just making a mistake that was so wrong, but so obvious to anyone who had an understanding of the mathematics, to basically anyone who had read a book about poker. Yeah, and people will say, like, "Oh, you know, the greats didn't have a teacher. Like Michelangelo didn't have a teacher." But actually, if you go back and you look at the great masters, you see generally, consistently, that almost every one of them did have a teacher. Almost every one of them learnt from the great people of that era, and then took it a step further. And that's why they're great, like standing on the shoulders of giants.
This brings up this really interesting thing, that there's a massive difference between the East and the West. I think we've spoken about this a little bit before, but there's a quote by Oscar Wilde that those who can't do teach. And in the West, because I think of capitalism, there's this idea that if you're really good at what you do, then you'll be doing it. You won't be teaching someone else how to do it. So the people who are really doing well, they're not teachers, they're professionals. And the teachers, the group of teachers tend to be made up of people who aren't doing well enough to be successful in their vocation, so they have to teach in order to survive. Whereas in the East, the people who are excellent are teachers. That's the progression. You go from beginner to intermediate to advanced student, and then you become a teacher, and you become a beginner teacher, an intermediate teacher, and an advanced teacher. But the progression is clear, and in fact, in a lot of Eastern traditions, you have to teach, and most teachers who are excellent teachers are teachers begrudgingly, but in the opposite way that teachers are begrudging in the West. So I think that forms a lot of the skepticism and the denial of the importance of a teacher, is because most people who we call teachers in the West are not really teachers. They're just failures.
Yeah. Well, for me, one trend that I find is that, and it's something that I value as well, is that if someone is excellent at something, then they're almost always willing to teach it, because they're like, I put in all this hard work and it was hard. It was a struggle. So if you come to me humbly and say, I want to learn this, then I will jump at the opportunity if I think someone is genuine in their intention to learn, because they're let's see, they're saying, well, I want to know this, and the teacher or the person who's gone through all this wants to give someone their knowledge, because they want someone to well, not get the shortcut, but they want someone to progress rapidly, so they don't have to go through all of these complex array of errors which are necessary for them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It reminds me of an opposite example of this behavior. I had a lover who was a psychopath, and she was really interesting. She's also an artist, and we often sort of made art side by side. And she had this beautiful way of using pencil. She created this amazing velvety gradation between darks and lights. And when I saw it, I really liked it. And I asked her how she did it, and she wouldn't tell me. And I was so surprised, because here was this thing that she'd developed, and it was beautiful. So if she showed me how to do it, I could have used it. I mean, I wouldn't have used it like her in isolation of other technique, but it would have helped make more art. But she wanted to keep this thing that she developed for herself, for its I don't know what you call it. Its value its unique value. I guess she felt that if other people had this technique, then that would devalue her art, which is such a strange idea, but it's so common. Again, in the West, people don't want to share what they know and what they can do, because they identify with it. It's part of themselves, and they want to keep that.
Yes, it's this scarcity mentality. And I've been thinking about that a bit recently, because like I do a lot of writing and publish it somewhere, and if it doesn't get attention or whatever, then maybe I might feel like I'm a failure, or especially if it's something that I put a lot of work into. But then I say to myself, this is the way I normally phrase it. I'm drinking from a spring that never runs dry, and that spring is creativity, and that spring is also God, for lack of a better term. So it's something inside of us that can always come up with new ideas and new techniques, and that's available to everyone. But if you sit around and you're like grabbing onto what you have, like this sort of golem, like my precious, this kind of thing, you're never going to be able to realize that actually you have accessibility to this great wide range of information and knowledge and creativity. That's not the end of our conversation, but it's the end of the first part. It was a 2.5 hour long conversation, so you can check out the rest of it over the coming weeks. And there's another 2 parts to go. Thanks so much for listening. Your amazing energy and attention and the insight that you provide to us through your comments on the side on the YouTube video mean a lot to us. Remember, you can jump onto Steemit. That's Steemit with 2 e's.com/@paradise-paradox. And if you follow us and upvote us, show your support, that helps us out a lot. We really appreciate it. Helps us earn a few more dollars to keep this show rolling. And also, you can jump onto donate.theparadiseparadox.com to show your support in direct monetary fashion. Send us a few dollars. We appreciate that very much by PayPal or Bitcoin or altcoins, whatever you like. Take your choice, pick your options, and send us a little bit. Because we do appreciate when you give to us. We appreciate all of the tips that are coming in there, and it helps us keep going with this project, because we know that someone out there is enjoying what we're beaming out to the universe. So much appreciated again, and hope you enjoyed the episode. Stay tuned for more interesting conversations with crazy characters like Link and Jay. That's it. Peace.